Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. A good GM should always be prepared. No matter what your RPG of choice is, game preparation is very important. Preparation can make the difference between an excellent GM and a terrible one. Prep can also make the difference between feeling awesome during and after a session versus not so much. Today, I set off again on the Obsidian Monolith to discuss game preparation with the aid of an excellent GM resource, Never Unprepared by Phil Vecchione. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello listener, greetings fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 56 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host Lex Starwalker and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. I've got a great show for you today, going to be talking all about game prep and how to get the most bang for your buck with however much time you have to spend preparing for your next session. But before I get into that, I want to send out a thank you to Adriano Piazza for your donation to Star Walker Studios. I really appreciate it. And I also want to give a shout out and thank you to my newest patron, Barb Dolis. So thank you so much, Adriano and Barb, for supporting the show. I really appreciate it. And again, if you would like to help support the show, you can check out the Star Walker Studios Patreon page at patreon.com/Star Walker Studios. So as a GM myself, not to mention host of this here fine podcast, I am always on the lookout for good GM resources to pass on to you, not to mention use myself, of course. A few of the guests I've interviewed on the show in the past have recommended the book Never Unprepared, The Complete Game Master's Guide to Session Prep by Phil Vecchione. So I want to thank Mr. Martin Rauya for sending me a review copy of this book so that I could talk about it on the show with you today. He was also kind enough to send me some of the other great GM resources published by Engine Publishing, which I will be discussing on future episodes. And while I'm talking about Engine Publishing, if you've never done so, definitely go check out the Gnome Stew blog for some more great GM resources that you can use. Now, of course, I will have links to all these things in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. I'll have a link to Never Unprepared on Amazon if you want to get that book for yourself. And that will be a referral link. So another great way to support the show is to click on that and go buy stuff on Amazon. Also, I'll have a link to Engine Publishing's website if you'd like to see what else they've got going on, as well as a link to the Gnome Stew blog. So this book, Never Unprepared, is an excellent resource for GMs. I was very excited to get it and to check it out because I have had so many people on the show recommend it to me, and because it's about game prep. And as I'm sure you know, if you're been with the show for a while, I'm a big proponent for game prep. Like I said at the top of the show, I think it can and often will be the difference between a great GM and a terrible GM. Now, there are some people out there that can run an awesome session with zero prep, but those people are few and far between. And I think for most of us, at least spending some time doing some sort of preparation before your session will greatly improve the experience, not only for your players, but for you as the GM. And that was one of the insights that I gained from this book and that I'd never really thought of from that point of view before. Obviously, good preparation is going to make the game more enjoyable for your players, right? In the very beginning of the book, Phil talks about how silence is death in RPGs. And when you're telling a gripping tale and you've got this great scene going on, and you as a GM have to stop and look something up in a book or fumble through your notes or try to figure out how you're going to react to what just happened, that just kills your mood, your pacing, your momentum. It just, all goes away. And your players are going to start looking at their phones. They're going to start having side conversations that aren't relevant to the game. And you lose them. Right? So not being prepared can definitely be a huge detriment to your session as far as the experience that the players have. But the insight that I got from reading this book in the very beginning is that it actually also will be a detriment to yourself as GM and how much you enjoy the game. I mean, again, think about that moment where something's happened and you don't know what to do, you don't know how to react, and you're flipping through books or you're going through your notes or you're racking your brain trying to decide what to do, and you're coming up with nothing, right? That's not a fun moment for most of us as GMs. That's not the moment that we're going to look back at and say that was an awesome moment for me in that session. That was where I was really having a lot of fun, right? We have the most fun when we feel confident and the ideas are just flowing and the players are having fun and there's a lot of back and forth and we've got good momentum and good emotion going at the game table. That's when we're having fun as GM, not when we're having one of those, oh shit, what do I do moments, right? So that was an interesting insight to me that not only is preparation something I do for my players, but it's also something I do for myself so that I can be more relaxed during the game session because I know I'm ready, I know I'm prepared, and I can have more fun. And that's what ultimately this hobby is about, right? Is having a good time with your friends. So not only does this book give you some pointers on preparing for an RPG session, but it also helps you to figure out how to make your prep work for you and how to use it to shore up any weaknesses that you have as a GM. And because of that, I think this book is a useful resource for all GMs. I would be amazed if there's a GM out there that couldn't gain some insight from this book. Some of us more than others, right? But I think everybody's going to get something out of this. Most importantly, it gives advice on how to manage your time for preparation and how to get the most out of the time that you have for preparation, whatever that time is. Now, despite the fact that the author, Phil Vecchione, does a lot of prep for his games compared to maybe what most of us do, definitely compared to what I do, and honestly more than I want to do, I learned from him that I'm spending a lot more time doing prep than I really need to. And a lot of that time that I'm spending doing prep is being wasted on things I don't really need. This book is useful for any RPG. It's not written for a particular game or even a particular genre. So whatever game you're running, this is a cool book for you. It's always nice to find these resources that are not tied to a specific system so that they can be useful for all of us. So this episode is going to be a combination review of this book, Never Unprepared, and a discussion of the book, as well as a discussion of game prep in general and what I've learned from the book and how I'm applying it to my own preparation process. So the book begins with an introduction and a discussion of game prep from a broad perspective. And then the author breaks down the process of game prep into 5 phases. And then through following chapters, he explains each phase in detail. So I had quite a few revelations when reading this book. But one of the first came from the discussion of what game prep is for, namely to help you as a GM to run the game with confidence and to avoid awkward moments of silence where you're fumbling around trying to decide what to do. I mean, just that, like that is the purpose, right? You know, something I've learned professionally is that it's very hard to achieve anything worthwhile when you don't have a clear purpose. right? If I'm designing an experiment, before I even start thinking about my methods or what reagents I'm going to use or anything like that, I need to know what I'm trying to accomplish with this experiment, right? When I'm writing up my lab notebook, my first thing is purpose. What is the purpose of this experiment? What am I hoping to accomplish? What am I hoping to learn, right? And the same thing is true with game prep. If you're not going into it with a clear purpose, then chances are really good you're going to be wasting some time. So our purpose here is to make the experience of running a game for our friends as enjoyable as possible for us as game masters, because we feel confident in what we're doing and we feel like no matter what happens, we're prepared and we're going to have an answer to whatever the players throw at us. Now, each of us is going to do preparation differently, because your personal preparation should be designed to shore up your own personal weaknesses as a GM. And this was another big revelation to me, that my prep system should be designed from the ground up. So first of all, there should be a system. And second of all, that system should be designed. Now, I, like most GMs, I imagine, just kind of fell into my prep system. And it is a system. Even what I had before I read this book, it was a system. It just wasn't one that was consciously designed. It was just me kind of doing what felt right or what seemed like a good thing to do at the time, but without really giving a whole lot of thought to it as a process, right? And I certainly didn't design a system that I then apply to every game I run, right? So another realization that I had reading this book is that I personally write way too much when I prep. Not only is this a relief to learn this to my cramping hand, but it also cuts down my prep time enormously. So I can now get more prep done that's more effective in less time. So that's what I call a win-win-win. I love you, Dark Matter. Anyway, so let's go into the phases of prep. So what's really interesting to me learning about the phases of prep as Phil describes them is where I got these phases right, again, without any real planning or concept of designing a system, and where I got them wrong. So the book gives an overview of the phases and the process, and then it devotes a chapter to each of these phases. Now, these individual chapters about each phase can help you determine whether you're doing too much or too little in that particular phase. And these chapters can also help you evaluate how well you already do that phase. Is this something you're really good at already? Or is this something that you can improve on? So the first phase in the process is brainstorming. Now, this is one that I actually got right. This is something that I've always done and comes very naturally to me. I imagine partly because I've been into creative writing since I could write, like literally. I think I wrote my first story when I was in 3rd grade, maybe. It was a long time ago. And, part of that process is brainstorming. I remember learning about brainstorming long ago in elementary school. And, the key points to brainstorming is you're just generating ideas. You're coming up with as many ideas as you can, and you're just jotting them down, okay? There are no bad ideas at this point. You're not evaluating the ideas. You're not saying, oh, that's a good idea, or oh, that's a bad idea, or oh, that idea will never work. And you're not trying to fit the ideas together or figure out how you would make this idea happen. You're just generating ideas, writing them down. That's all you do in brainstorming. The next phase is selection. So at this point, we narrow down that list that we generated through brainstorming. This is something I've also always done. So brainstorming, you generate this huge list. You're not worried about how practical any of it is, how good any of it is. You're just coming up with ideas. Then you begin selection. You start going through that list and picking out the ones you really like. Now, after selection is conceptualization. And this is where you take those handful of ideas that you've selected that you're going to work with, and you start expanding on them. And this is where you start thinking about, okay, how am I going to fit this into my story? How am I going to make this idea work? How am I going to hook the players into this idea? Now, this is where I started to go off course in my own personal game prep before I read this book, because I was combining conceptualization with the next phase, which is called documentation. So in documentation, this is where you start writing stuff down. So you realize we've gone through 3 phases before we get to stage 4, documentation, which is where we start writing things down. So, at this point, there's been very little writing. You've been jotting down ideas, bullet points. That's it. There's been no real writing, You haven't needed to be at a computer yet. Now, one of the keys to the documentation phase is you write what you need and only what you need. And I'll get back to this a little later. So what I was doing, and this is a very common thing that the author talks about, is I was combining conceptualization and documentation. And there's some real drawbacks to that. So, when I was conceptualizing, how am I going to fit these ideas together? How am I going to make them work? I'm writing things down at this point. And one of the problems with that is it's kind of a waste of time, because during conceptualization, things are very much in flux. And, a lot of this stuff you're writing down, if you're writing things down at this point, you're not going to end up using, because you're going to change your mind, or you're going to change something about how that idea works, right? So it's kind of a waste of time to really write much of anything down until you've got a finished concept that you're happy with, which is why documentation comes later. Also, just as a quick side note, brainstorming and selection are also 2 stages that people tend to combine. And again, that's where during the brainstorming process, you're evaluating those ideas and saying, oh, that's not a good idea. Oh, that's not a good idea. And again, it's better during brainstorming to just generate ideas and not try to do selection at the same time, partly because it kind of stifles your creative process. If you're judging the ideas, you're going to come up with much more ideas if you just let them flow and you don't worry about what's a quote unquote good or bad idea, right? And save that for later. And you never know, once you get to selection, you may decide that one of those ideas that you might have originally thought wasn't a great idea turns out to be a better idea, or even an awesome idea, because maybe it interacts with some other ideas you had, right? So if you would have been doing selection during brainstorming, you might not have written that idea down, and you might miss this opportunity to do this really cool thing that you've just figured out. And then finally, after documentation, the final phase is review. And this is where you go over your notes and what you've come up with for the session, and you review it. You look for mistakes, you make sure you've got everything you need, that kind of thing. Now, these phases are a way to conceptualize the process of game preparation. The reality, of course, is a little more fluid, and you may find that the order of the phases can vary. You may move back and forth between them, and that's okay. But it's important to understand each phase and to know at any given time what phase you are in. And this can really help you to avoid wasting your time. So as I said, the difference between conceptualization and documentation was a really big eye-opener for me. So I thought I'd talk a little bit more about that concept. So this breaking down this part of the prep into 2 separate discrete steps was, kind of a eureka moment for me. I did the thing that Phil talked about in the book, where as soon as I started conceptualizing, I'd be writing things down. And, like I said, this can waste a lot of time because those ideas can change. Another nice thing about splitting conceptualization and documentation into 2 steps is that I don't need a notebook to write in and a table to write on, or a computer to write in for the conceptualization phase. I don't need to write anything down at this phase, which means that I can do conceptualization anywhere, anytime. I can do it while I'm driving. I can do it while I'm walking, while I'm on a run, or while I'm standing in line at the grocery store. I also learned from the chapter on documentation that I tend to write way too much. I'm writing down things that I don't need to write down. So here it's really important to evaluate your strengths and weaknesses as a GM. Okay, so here's the thing. Okay, this is what we're really doing with preparation, is we're looking at ourselves as a GM and saying, what am I really good at? Right? Like, what comes easily to me? Because as a GM, there are many, many skills involved. Right? You have many hats that you wear as a GM, and all of us, some of those things are going to be things that we're really good at, and it comes really easily. Like for me personally, one of my strengths is mechanics. As long as the mechanics of a system make sense and they're not too convoluted or too overly complex, I tend to internalize systems very easily, very quickly. I've got a really good memory when it comes to things that I read. So I tend to be able to quote rules like verbatim from the book of any system. So like right now I'm playing 5th edition, Star Wars. I used to do a lot of Numenera. And right now I could quote all kinds of rules from all of those systems pretty much exactly as they're written in the book. So that's a strength for me, right? So when I'm doing my game prep, I don't really need to worry so much about mechanics, right? Now, yeah, if there's something weird that comes up, like I'm going to do something underwater and I have no idea how, holding your breath works in the particular game or things like that, then that's something I might want to look into during my prep. But in general, I don't need to spend much or any of my prep time looking up mechanics or rules, because I already know them, right? That's one of my strengths. So part of prep is realizing your strengths so you don't waste time doing prep for that, because you don't need to. That's going to come to you during the game. The other part is recognizing your weaknesses, because those are the areas that you personally want to focus on when you're doing game preparation. So for me personally, as an example, one of my weaknesses as a GM is descriptions. Now, it's not that I can't do great descriptions. I totally can. The problem is that I often forget to just give the descriptions. I tend to, I want to get to the action. I want to get to the dialogue. I want to get to what's happening. And I tend to just forget to describe where the PCs are or what the person they're talking to looks like or anything like that. So I can shore up this weakness of mine by thinking about descriptions during my preparation. I can write down descriptions for particular things if I think I won't remember them. But again, the core kind of point of this book is to not spend any prep time on anything that you don't need to, right? If you're a brand new GM, you might not know. Right. And part of this is you're constantly evaluating and modifying your preparation process as you go on. So a brand new GM running your first session, you may not know what your strengths or weaknesses are. You may, though. But, as you run more, you're going to figure out, these times during the game, like I feel comfortable and confident, so maybe for you, coming up with descriptions is really easy and natural, and you describe everything. So for you, if that's you, then you don't need to spend prep time writing out descriptions. That's a wasted effort for you, because you can do that on the fly really well, right? But if there is something that, you find yourself having to stop the game and look something up, or you find yourself feeling awkward or unsure when you're running a game, that's an area that you want to focus on during your prep. So getting back to descriptions, if I'm doing this during my prep and I'm thinking, okay, here's this NPC that the PCs are going to interact with, I need to think about a description, like what's this NPC like, right? How do I describe this NPC? Or how do I describe this room that the PCs are going to be in, right? Now, when I come up with that description, if I feel like I've got it solid, then I don't need to write it down, right? I've got it. I've already done the prep in coming up with it. I don't need to write it down when I get to documentation. But if I come up with the description and maybe I'm worried I won't remember it, or maybe I want to express it in a very specific way, I want to use specific language to try to get a certain point across, then maybe I should write that down, right? But if I feel like I've got it, then maybe all I need is a little post-it note on my GM screen or on my notebook that says, hey, remember to describe this thing. And that's all I need. So again, part of this process is figuring out what you need and only doing what you need. The book also has an excellent chapter on tools that you can use in your game preparation. In addition to discussing different tools that you can use, the book also talks about how you may use different tools for different phases of preparation, which is what I do. And at the end of this, I'll kind of tell you what I use for each phase to kind of bring this all together, like how this might work for you and how it works for me. There's also a chapter to give you some help with time management. So not just figuring out how much time you actually have for preparing for your sessions, but also figuring out when is the best time for you to do it. There's also some great pointers on how to cut corners if you're running out of time and you need to streamline your process. A truly brilliant chapter in the book is chapter 10, in which you're shown how to make your own personal game prep templates for whatever you're using. So if you're using Word or OneNote or whatever, how you can make a template for your game prep that you can use. And this is really where the rubber hits the road in this book, I think. Because now that you've evaluated yourself as a GM and you know your strengths and you know your weaknesses, and you've figured out how to shore up those weaknesses with your game preparation, while at the same time not wasting time on your strengths, you can now design a template that will prompt you for this information. So every time you go to prep a session, you bring up this template and you just start filling in the blanks. And again, this is your template. This is what you need to prepare for your session. You don't have anything in there you don't need. So if you're awesome at descriptions, you don't have a description section in your template. I would have one in mine, but I wouldn't have a mechanics section. And the other nice thing about this is you can also evolve your template over time. So maybe, I start really working on description and I've got a place in my template for description. So when I get to documentation phase of my game prep, my template is prompting me for descriptions for things and I'm putting that in there. And maybe I do that for a while and I get it. And now I've done it so much that doing description is second nature. That's gone from a weakness to a strength now. And I no longer need to spend any time during preparation coming up with descriptions. I just take that out of my template and I don't use that anymore. And maybe at the same time, I've identified another weakness that I had that I didn't know about. And so I add that to the template. And another great way that you can modify your templates is just how they're laid out, right? And something I've been realizing lately is how important how something is laid out and presented is in an RPG. I've talked a lot about how, I'm enjoying the Star Wars RPG system by Fantasy Flight Games. But one place where that system falls flat on its face is how information is presented in the various books. First of all, you have information that you would think would be basic information that every GM needs to run a game that's not in the core book. It's spread all over all these different books that you A, have to buy, B, have to lug around to your game because they don't do PDFs, and C, have to remember which book is this thing in that I need and where in the book is it, right? Huge pain in the ass. The other part is the way that information is laid out within a given book. So I think I've talked about, or will talk about on the show, how if you're looking at, say, a starship in Star Wars, if you're looking at the stats, once you get to the weapons, it's just this huge block of text. So if you're talking about something like, say, a Star Destroyer that's got numerous weapon systems, it's all one block of text. There's not even any bold or changes in font or anything to help you find where one weapon starts and another one begins, or to find the damage of a particular weapon. You have to go through this like run-on paragraph of text. Terrible, terrible layout. Another problem is the NPCs are in a totally different part of the book than the ships, and the ships don't include basic NPC stats that you would need to actually use that ship in an encounter. So not only are you going to need multiple books, you're going to need multiple sections of the same book just to do the most basic thing, right? So this is showing how, layout is really important, and a terrible layout can be the difference between a great game and a mediocre game. I mean, right now, if I were to rate Star Wars as a system, like a 5 or a 10-star rating, it would lose at least an entire star just because of how poorly the information is laid out and presented. Because running it as a GM, it is a huge pain in the ass and adds to my prep time, because I have to compensate for Fantasy Flight Games' terrible layout, and I have to bring the information together in a format that I can quickly read and reference during a game session, so I'm not having downtime during the game trying to make sense of this block of text, right? So it takes more prep time to compensate for this terrible layout. So this is something to keep in mind when you're making your template and laying it out in a way so that you can easily find the information that you need. And this is also a way that you can improve your template over time. So maybe you make your template, you make your session notes, you run a session, and you did the descriptions for the NPCs, but you found that when it was time to give a description, you had a hard time finding it, right? Or maybe you're accessing information from your notes in an order other than the way it's laid out, right? Ideally, your notes are laid out so you just keep going down the page and everything's there in the order that you need it, right? So these are things that you can change in your template after a session. You can be like, oh, you know what? I need to put the descriptions of the NPCs in a more prominent place, or I need this part of my notes more towards the beginning and this more towards the end. And over time, as you fiddle with this after every session, you're going to get it exactly where you want it. Finally, the book goes into some methods for taking a more prep light approach and some strategies on what to do when something comes up and you either have to come up with a session on short notice, like you find out, oh, I'm running a game tomorrow I didn't know I was going to do, or you suddenly don't have enough time to do your normal prep because maybe something comes up and the time that you would normally do game prep, now you've got to do something else. So it has some strategies on how to cope with those situations and how to do prep in far less time than you normally would when you have to. So I think this is a great book that every GM should read. This book is an embodiment of the principle, work smarter, not harder. Even experienced GMs will learn from this book, and it's invaluable to new GMs. Myself, I've been GMing for over 20 years, and I learned quite a few strategies to not only decrease the amount of time I spend doing prep, but at the same time to get more done. For instance, when reading the chapter on making your own templates, I realized that my session notes are often not very well organized because I have a hard time finding the information I need while I'm actually running the game. So now I have a template that I use, and after each session, I can make any tweaks to how that template is laid out if there was information that I had a hard time finding during play. So I can make any of those tweaks that I need to. Even if you're a GM who does little or no prep, I think you'll get a lot out of this. You likely still go through the same 5 phases. You just do it in a truncated form. You may, like I did, realize that you're skipping a phase or combining 2 phases together, like brainstorming and selecting, or conceptualization and documentation. You may learn, like I did, that there's actually a more efficient way to do what you're doing, a way to spend even less time on prep than you already do, but have it be more helpful to you when you run the game. Now, if you're a GM who doesn't do a lot of prep, mainly because of lack of time, and you wish you had time to do more prep, This book will help you realize how much you can do when you're out and about. And this was a real eye-opener for me, because in this 5-stage process, the only stage where you need to be at a computer or at a table where you can write is documentation. So brainstorming, you're just making a list, which you can easily do with a small notebook, on a scrap piece of paper, or hell, a bar napkin, or on your phone. So here's what my prep looks like to kind of illustrate this. So for brainstorming, how I do that, it depends where I am and what I'm doing, okay? I have a small Moleskine notebook that I carry in my pocket that I have with me pretty much at all times when I'm not home. So a lot of times if I'm out and about and I want to brainstorm ideas, or an idea just comes to me, I'll jot it down in that little notebook. If I'm at home, I have a notebook for each campaign that I run. So if I'm at home, I'll do my brainstorming in that notebook, so it's with everything else. Or if I'm out and about and for some reason I don't have my little notebook I carry in my pocket, I will also use Google Keep on my phone to jot ideas down there. And that's nice too, because like OneNote, it will sync across all the devices that I have. Selection, same as brainstorming. If I'm out and about, I'll do it in my little notebook I carry, or I'll do it in Google Keep. If I'm at home, I will do it in my notebook for that particular campaign. Conceptualization is all in my head. Now, if I really need to write down a keyword or two to remember a concept, then I'll do that in my little notebook that I carry. And then finally, documentation. That I do on my computer in OneNote. And this is the only step of the process that I can't do anywhere, right? So the way I used to do game prep, I would do the brainstorming anywhere, anytime, but the rest of it, I felt like I had to be at my computer or be somewhere with my notebook with a good writing surface, right? I needed that for selection and conceptualization and all this stuff. And now I realize the only thing I need to be at home or somewhere where I can write is the final documentation step and maybe review, right? But the rest of it I can do anywhere, anytime, which is awesome. And for me, probably where I spend the most time in this process is conceptualization. And that's probably true for a lot of us. And to be able to do that without having to be at home is huge. Just opened up so much more time that I have now to spend preparing for my games. So to bring this all together, kind of tie it up in a little bow, game prep is a way for you as a GM to shore up your weaknesses so that when you're running a game, you can be confident and relaxed and have fun and not have to worry or be stressed out because something happens and you don't know what to do, or you have to come up with something on the fly and you're not happy with what you come up with. You can save a lot of time in your prep process by realizing what your strengths are and not spending prep time on those areas because you don't need it, and instead focus on those problem areas that you have where you need some help during the game. And finally, by understanding the different phases of the process and what's appropriate to do in each phase and how to do each phase, you can better manage your time, and you can find times to do a lot of your prep when you're out and about, waiting in line somewhere or waiting in the doctor's office or whatever. We have so much downtime in our lives where you might pull out your phone and start playing a game or something, where you just got a few minutes to kill, right? And these are all times that you can be doing game prep. Again, I want to thank Martin Rauja for sending me the copy of this book so I could read it and talk about it today. I really appreciate that. Definitely greatly increases the number of things I can talk about on this show when I receive review copies, because there's only so many things I can buy personally, right? I was really happy to talk about this book on the show because I think it's a really great resource for GMs, and it doesn't matter what game you run, this will be very helpful to you. And I know I personally got a lot from it. It's completely changed the way I look at game prep and how I do prep. And I do, since I've read this, I feel like I spend significantly less time preparing for games But when I'm running the game, I feel more prepared, and the prep that I do is more effective and more useful. So again, if you head on over to the website at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney/56 and check out episode 56's show notes, I will have links to this book on Amazon if you want to get it. I'll have links to Engine Publishing so you can see what other fine books they put out. And I'll have all the show notes for this episode there. If there was something you missed or you want to glance over again, it'll all be there. If you would like to send me some feedback on this topic or any topic, a great way to do so is to email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. Also, please follow me on Google+, just search for Lex Starwalker, and please follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Also, we have a Google+ community for Game Master's Journey that I really encourage you to join, and you can find a link to that in the show notes as well. And you can connect with other listeners and other gamers out there. And I also post updates on the show and what's going on with the show and any nuggets of GM wisdom I find out in the internet. In the show notes, you can also find a button that will take you to the Patreon page, donate button, iTunes and Stitcher buttons if you'd like to subscribe to the show and or leave a review. I really appreciate it when people leave reviews of the show. And also towards the bottom of the show notes, you'll find the link to the Google Plus community I just mentioned. Also, we now have a newsletter for Starwalker Studios, and you can sign up there at the bottom of the show notes. This is a newsletter for the studio as a whole, for all the podcasts. It will be a monthly newsletter. I'll just send one out once a month, so you're not going to get a bunch of junk in your inbox, at least not from Starwalker Studios. And I'll just let you know kind of what's going on with the studio, what's going on with each of the shows, that kind of thing in the newsletter. Another great way to keep up to date with what's going on here at Starwalker Studios. You can also find a link to my YouTube channel. I do lots of actual play on YouTube, and you can go check that out. I have Numenera actual play, D&D, Star Wars. I just started running a new Star Wars campaign with the players from my Tyranny of Dragons campaign, and we're putting those up on YouTube. So far, we have Session 0 and Session 1 up. And I want to say, for any of you that are going to watch my YouTube videos and may have noticed that the last few videos I put out weren't as good quality video-wise. My video of me is pretty low res and a lot of times freezes. I'm pretty sure that's because of my shitty DSL internet that I have right now. I'm kind of living in a temporary place while I'm looking for a house, and we just can't get good internet here. And believe me, the irony is not lost on me that in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I had internet that was 7 times faster, or wait, 6 times faster than my internet here in Seattle, which is supposedly, you know, the heart of technology in the US. Yeah, not so much, at least not when it comes to internet hookups. But hopefully when I get a house, I will be able to get better internet. But until then, what I'm going to try to do is, instead of doing the Hangouts on air and letting that post automatically to YouTube, I'm going to try recording the videos locally on my hard drive. Hopefully that will allow them to record in higher quality and then upload them to YouTube. Now, I don't know if this will work because, as I said, my internet's really slow, so it will probably take all night to upload a video to YouTube. And the other problem with my internet is sometimes it's kind of intermittent. So if I lose internet in the middle of my 6-hour download, you know, I have to start over. So I'm going to try it. I don't know if it'll work out. But the nice thing about that, if it does work out, since I'm uploading the video anyway and I have it on my hard drive, I can edit it. So up to this point, pretty much all my actual plays on YouTube are unedited. So that means, you know, there may be times where we take a break or we start talking about something non-game related, and that's all in there. So depending, you may like that. I know some people like that. They like kind of feeling like they're a fly on the wall. But then some people would rather have all that cut out and just have the actual gameplay. So since I'm going to be uploading it anyway, I'm going to try my hand at some video editing and not only cut out parts that aren't relevant, but also cut it into smaller chunks. So maybe half-hour to hour-long sections instead of one big 4-hour video. Because I know, myself, I watch stuff on YouTube, and you might get halfway through, and then you got to go do something else. And now you got to find your spot again in this 4-hour video. So it's a lot easier if they're in smaller pieces, right? So that's what I'm going to try. We'll see how it works. But I have lots of actual play goodness on my YouTube channel. I also have a video on how to use Google Plus Hangouts for gaming, some basics on using Roll20 for gaming. So if you're new to gaming online and you have questions about those kinds of things, definitely check out those tutorials. I think they're pretty helpful for people just starting out, like some of just basic stuff, like how to set things up and stuff like that. Also, in the show notes at the bottom, you can find a link to get a free 30-day trial of Audible books, courtesy of Game Master's Journey, and of course the Amazon referral link, which again, those are other great ways that you can help support the show. So I hope that you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I will be back next week with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.